This video is brought to you by Skillshare. It might not have escaped your attention that the Nintendo Switch celebrated its 2-year anniversary this month. That's usually not something that I care to mention or mark with any kind of specific video, but I think the success of the Switch 2 years down the road is very encouraging for any company with a suffering console. Nintendo turned this around after the disappointment of the Wii U, and now they've got this console that everyone wants to put their games on and replicate. It seems like yesterday that pundits were calling time on Nintendo's involvement in the console market and saying that they should focus on making games instead. Which is an intriguing thing to say, really. Because it calls to attention the fact that even though the Wii U didn't sell that well, it was still host to a ton of really fun and creative video games. It shows that no matter how bad a console is, you'll always be able to find a game somewhere in its library that was surprisingly good, all things considered. We tend to sleep on some of the famously bad consoles since we imagine that there's nothing to be gained from owning one, but you know, sometimes developers accidentally put a great video game on a console that doesn't repay the favor very well. You'll be surprised how often this happens, and if you're not surprised, then this probably isn't the video for you. The word underrated is used a little too often when it comes to talking about video games for my taste, because everyone likes to pretend that they enjoy obscure video games that not a lot of people have played, but the problem is it's on a sliding scale and it doesn't always apply. Though really good games that end up on bad consoles, that kind of works because it's not a lot of people gave a shit about them when they came out, and maybe less so now. Except me, because I'm making this video. I always give a shit. Hey, do you know why you don't see a lot more companies enter the console market anymore? Oh, tons of reasons, and none of them have anything to do with Soulja Boy defying logic and basic copyright law to slap his name onto some cheap Chinese knockoff and claim it as his own, much to the wrath of Nintendo and their big, angry lawyers. It's fine, my boy Soulja is over here diversifying his portfolio by using the Legend of Zelda theme and not knowing what rupees are. I reckon he'll be just fine. But back to consoles, because even with Soulja Boy getting things so spectacularly wrong, I'm not sure if the people behind the Ouya did all that much better. And they had a lot of money that wasn't theirs. When it comes to Kickstarter disasters, you might think of Mighty No. 9, but I, a scholar, I think of the Ouya, this funky little microconsole from 2013 that promised a cheap, upgradable gaming experience unlike anything else on the market. The problem is, you kinda need some exciting games before anybody starts to care about that. In the end, no one cared. Pretty sure those Kickstarter backers that raised $8.5 million cared, but apart from that, sales of the Ouya were so bad that the assets were sold 2 years later to Razer, and the console discontinued to help recover some of the huge losses. The Ouya occupied this weird space in the market that was partially covered by Android phones, but the unique feature of customizing your console was never fully realized, and very few developers flocked to give the Ouya much of a fighting chance by putting some interesting games on the system. My favorite is Just Rain, which is just raining down the kind of transformative content that this console needed more of. In truth, it had Towerfall and not a lot else, but that's okay because Towerfall is this really fun multiplayer brawling party game that sets itself apart from other Ouya launch titles by being kind of incredible. Creator Matt Thorson signed an exclusivity deal with Ouya so that Towerfall would be tied to the console, but once that deal ran out, the game was ported and expanded across to every other console, and finally, Towerfall could get the credit that it richly deserves. It's like Smash Bros, but two-dimensional and with arrows, and I kind of love it. There's no shame with refusing to go down with a sinking ship. Not sure if anyone's worked it out yet, but me mentioning the Wii U at the start of this video is my way of telling you that I'm not gonna be talking about it today. In recent times, the Wii U has acted as the go-to example of a failed console housing some pretty incredible video games. Since it's fresh in everyone's memories, Nintendo fans had to sit idly by as the competition was having a less shitty time. The Wii U isn't exactly a highlight of Nintendo's history, but I think you'd be stretching things a little far if you were to say that it's up there with some of Nintendo's biggest mistakes. I don't know if you've heard, but they've made some pretty huge blunders in the past. like creating their competition and making an agreement to put some of their IPs on one of the worst consoles in history. That's pretty bad. The Philips CDI is a fascinating slice of the gaming timeline where a long-term deal between Philips, Sony and Nintendo got torn up at the 11th hour, and this strange piece of hardware was squeezed onto the market as a multimedia device that could play music as well as shitty video games, except no one really cared. To be fair, the CDI cost $1,000 in 1992, which is nearly $1,800 in today's money, and with CD technology moving forward at a commensurable rate, especially when you consider that the Sony PlayStation was just a few years away, people not giving a shit makes a lot of sense. But occasionally, you find enough people who do care, and when that happens, you get something like Burn Cycle, a game that takes full advantage of the CDI's hardware and has cutscenes in it that look pretty incredible, really. Burn Cycle is a fairly standard point-and-click adventure title with its fair share of puzzles and shaky dialogue, but I'm just a little amazed that you've got a game like this that someone put time and effort into on the same console as beautiful train wrecks like the CDI Zelda games. You know, I'd love to see the parallel universe where these consoles with full motion video took off, since games of this caliber are virtually extinct nowadays, but damn if it ain't a cool thing to look at. Hey, if you want that juicy cinematic gaming experience, you're better off with Burn Cycle than most of the competition. Not if you want faces like these to look at all day, though. If you want to talk about expensive video game consoles that no one bought because people quite like holding on to money unless you can provide them with something that might be worth the investment, the CDI is not as bad as things get with video game consoles. Actually, it kind of is, because you're not going to find something out there that is charging you more than $1,800. That is kind of ridiculous. It didn't even have Ridge Racer on it. What the fuck? That's the key distinction, though. The Philips CDI marketed itself as the must-have interactive entertainment box, not just a games console. It didn't work, obviously, but Philips charged so much because they believed that their little lump of plastic had so much more to offer the world than just a handful of terrible video games. The 3DO, on the other hand, was never designed to be anything other than a means of playing exciting, innovative games of the future, and so retailed for a hefty $699 at launch. This thing had a strange start to life since it was conceived by the same guy who founded Electronic Arts, but manufacture for the console was shipped out to third parties who were better suited to handling mass production. This made the 3DO eye-wateringly expensive, and coupled with its 1993 release coincided with a console market that was already straining under the weight of a lot of other mediocre bits of hardware, like the Philips CDI for example. This thing didn't sell well. The difference is that the 3DO was a pretty robust piece of hardware capable of some very impressive graphical output that few other consoles could match. Plumbers Don't Wear Ties looks so realistic, man. The future is awesome. It is, but the 3DO didn't last long enough to see much of it. What it succeeded in doing was giving the world the best version of Star Control 2, with the 3DO flexing its relatively chunky hardware and CD technology. I wanted to focus on console exclusives, or at least games that started life as console exclusives, but Star Control 2 is a similar story since the definitive version of the game was released on the 3DO in 1994 with better graphics, sound design, and a ton of quality of life tweaks to make it an easier game to get to grips with. Having this level of space exploration at your fingertips reminds me a lot of the Elite games and, to a lesser, more disappointing extent, No Man's Sky, but Star Control 2 implements all of these without tripping over its own ambition, and that is very impressive for 1994. What it was doing on a console that barely lasted 3 years and sold less than 2 million units, I don't know. They should have done a crossover with Plumbers Don't Wear Ties because, oof, I don't understand these alien life forms. Get yourself a console that can do both. Nintendo's insistence on reinventing the world is the best worst thing about them. It's really awesome and helpful when it works, and it does more often than not, but Nintendo have been their own worst enemy on more than one occasion. This desire to innovate above everything else has produced such priceless ideas as bolting a lump of plastic to the bottom of the N64 and sticking a finger in your Wii, as well as all this cardboard that the world doesn't really know what to do with now. Ideas so mental that you wonder how Nintendo have any money to play with at this point. In the mid-1990s, Nintendo were one of the many tech companies who were experimenting with stereoscopic 3D. But the big difference here is that Nintendo had a lot of money at this point and could happily pump some of it into turning this concept into a full-blown gaming console. They were like mad scientists, and they made that monster. VR is a pretty big point of discussion in 2019, not just from the standpoint of what virtual reality can do for gaming and why Nintendo hasn't properly embraced it yet, but also if we need it at all. I'm sure we're going to get to that point in time where virtual reality is just used as an extra means of immersion for a game, but I'm worried about rushing into things a little too soon, because famously in the past, it's caused a few headaches. Literally, as it turns out, because the technology behind Nintendo's Virtual Boy wasn't as airtight as they would have hoped. And instead of acting as a window into the immersive world of 3D video gaming, it instead gave a ton of kids migraines and was in general very awkward to use and to mount on your head. There were issues of motion sickness and dizziness, and I remember there were a few reported cases of some kids donning the headset and being horrified at seeing a reminder that if you've enjoyed this video and want to see more, then be sure to click subscribe and hit that bell for notifications of every new upload. The other issue with the Virtual Boy is that Nintendo didn't do a ton to support it with enticing video games, with only 14 games making it over to North America. One of these was Wario Land, a relatively new side franchise for Nintendo at a time when this character hadn't found his special niche with minigame compilations. Wario Land for Virtual Boy is very strange because it doesn't even try to take advantage of the 3D gimmick, and there's absolutely no reason why it needed to be on this console. It's another really fun, very solid 2D platformer from a period of time when Nintendo were knocking it out of the park in this department, and it amazes me to no end that we've never seen Wario Land re-released. If Nintendo wants to make their Switches Online genuinely worthwhile, fucking Wario Land, I swear to you! My farty boy deserves so much more than this. So you might be wondering how I'm ranking these games, and honestly I'm not so sure myself. It's not like there's some perfect correlation between how badly a console fails and the quality of the games on it that leaves me with the perfectly imperfect storm to cap the end of this video with. The worst console of all time is what, the Atari Jaguar maybe? This fucking monstrosity that finished off one of the great pioneers of video games? Yeah, probably, but were there any truly great games on it that are worth talking about? Probably. I haven't really looked into it all that much, if just because I need some kind of segue so that I can talk about Panzer Dragoon Saga again. At a time when PlayStation were flaunting the critically and commercially outstanding Final Fantasy VII, SEGA tasked some of their poor developers to create an RPG that could somehow go toe-to-toe with Square Enix's magnum opus. That's really hard, and depending on who you ask and how much they idolize oversized swords, an impossible task that no game has achieved since. These people haven't played Panzer Dragoon Saga because what SEGA achieved here, against all odds, is a masterful, transcendent approach of the RPG genre that doesn't try to copy Final Fantasy VII's ideas, but instead goes for a more dynamic style of combat that almost feels like an action RPG at times. Throw in some fully 3D graphics and voice acting, and you've got a recipe for one of the best RPGs of all time that should have, by all accounts, earned SEGA a ton of money. Why didn't it? Well, timing. SEGA needed a game to go up against Final Fantasy VII because they were losing the console war hard. The Sega Saturn wasn't selling well in the West and would continue to flop until it was discontinued after just 3 years of production. Sega didn't help themselves by limiting third-party support and never releasing a mainline Sonic game for the console, but they pinned a lot of their hopes on Panzer Dragoon Saga in a desperate attempt to drag some of that market share over to the Saturn. This game came out in 1998, the same year that production of the Sega Saturn halted for Western markets, and despite Panzer Dragoon Saga's immense quality, it simply had too much to do in such a short space of time. If the best game of all time came out tomorrow on the PlayStation Vita, would you buy it? It's a hard sell under even the best of circumstances. This is RabbidLuigi, and the tragedy of Panzer Dragoon Saga actually runs a little bit deeper than that, because the previous games in this franchise were on-rail shooters. So in order to make an RPG, the dev team had to start virtually from scratch, and the fact that they made such a high caliber of game in the end is a goddamn miracle. Imagine spending so much time on something, creating something so amazing, but getting such a small amount of financial reward at the end of it. It's like making a YouTube video in 2019. Some of you might know that the editing software I've been using for the past 7 years recently decided to not function anymore on my work computer, and I've had to relearn a new program from scratch, and this would have been a big problem if it wasn't for today's sponsor, Skillshare. Skillshare offers over 25,000 classes to help you learn a huge variety of skills ranging from graphic design work to understanding how to budget your personal finances to creating your own website. Or, if you're like me, and the crutch you've been leaning on for so long has now broken, then yeah, they do have some very robust courses on video editing. I was a complete beginner in Adobe Premiere not that long ago, but then I sat down and blazed through all 19 lessons of this beginner course, and now I'm feeling pretty good about things. Millions are already learning through Skillshare, and there's a link in this video's description so you can join them too, with the first 500 to sign up via this link receiving 2 free months of Skillshare Premium. Skillshare has done a lot for me recently, and it could do a lot for you too. Go to skl.sh/RabbidLuigi and sign up today.